Well, good morning, everyone. I can see people are filing in front of me on my little participants number. We've gone up to 94, and we're expecting quite a few more from that. So welcome, everybody. And some of you will be joining with your cameras on. Probably best once you do join with your camera on, if you then turn your camera off, otherwise everyone can see you throughout the presentation. It's an initiative test, isn't it? But I'll let you join and mute yourselves and turn your cameras off in the background as we go along. We're expecting probably a couple of hundred on the call, so we can't have everyone's video cameras on, else there won't be room to see James, who's the feature presentation. So thank you for turning your cameras off. Well, welcome everyone to our NHT online webinar with James Pope on head teacher wellbeing, which is probably about the most crucial subject. Certainly in education at the moment, if not quite the world. We've been running online webinars here at the NHT since the start of lockdown, since about April, May time, and we'll be doing so in the foreseeable future. And we're really grateful to you for helping us make them a reality and for joining us with them. So thank you for that. James Pope, as you can see, is on my, as you've got your screen set up, but he's on my left, but he might be on your right or underneath me, I don't know. He's there anyway, and he's going to be covering teacher wellbeing and the Heads Up programme. I'll just say a few words about James, just as people filter in, and a few housekeeping things, and I'll leave the floor to him. James is an experienced educational leader. He's worked in school leadership for over a decade. He's been a head teacher and executive head teacher in the South West, working in schools facing significant educational challenges. If he looks familiar to you, you may have seen him and his school featured in the BBC Two documentary, which was just titled School. So it was obviously a busy executive creative meeting to come up with the title about the Castle School in South Gloucestershire. James started Inspire Educate, have I pronounced that right, James? Okay. To develop a network of like-minded leaders, to support head teachers, senior leaders and schools, offering advice, guidance and coaching support, and with the aim of changing the culture and ethos in schools he works in, and more broadly the education sector. So there's some fine ambitions in there, James, for you to live up to. I mean, the aim of the webinar today really is how are you, and to look at how teachers are feeling at the moment, and how we take the time to actually ask ourselves that question, or you to ask yourselves that question, and actually take the time to think about your own well-being before looking at the well-being of everyone else around you, really. So James will be exploring the challenges of leading through a crisis, and celebrating the work of head teachers, looking at how we reconnect with our purpose, and promoting a sense of well-being and positivity. And if that isn't enough of a challenge to set James up for, I don't know what is. So at that point, I'd just like to say thank you very much, James, for being with us today. I'll hand you over to him in just one moment, just to say we've got a chat function at the bottom, which somebody's found. So if so we're expecting about 200 on the call, so I won't have time to pick you out individually. But if you've got questions as James is going along, put them in the chat, and I'll pick them up with him at the end, or James has put them himself, and we'll take them from there. So anyway, that's enough of me yakking. I'll hand you over to James Pope. James, floor is yours.
Lovely. Thank you, Andy, and good morning, everybody. I'll just do a little bit of digital wizardry and get us started. So yes, welcome everybody. You'll see that the title of this presentation is called "Where's Your Head At?" And as Andy said, this is very much focused on you, actually, as school leaders. The intent of this presentation and the intent of the work that we do with Heads Up is very much focused on head teachers. And I suppose in part that's a reflection of my own experience of being a school leader. But it's also in part sort of recognising that there does seem to be quite a significant gap in the system in regards to sort of well-being and nourishment and looking after people. And often head teachers are the sort of the bottom of that pile. And that was true pre-pandemic, but it's certainly the case from sort of my experience and the sort of network of head teachers that I work across, that it still sort of appears to be the case now. So hopefully during this presentation, I'll come to the aims of the presentation in a minute, but hopefully during this presentation you will have time to reflect on yourself and your own well-being, and then you can take those strategies forward for your staff and your teams. A little bit of housekeeping. He says, if he can get his clicker to work. No, let's try that instead. Okay, so a little bit of housekeeping. I think most of you are, but if you could be on mute, that would be fantastic. Otherwise, I'll just get really, really distracted and lose my thread of thought. If you can rename your screen to your actual name, that's really useful, just so we can see who you are. Absolutely welcome your feedback and contributions through the chat. So if you could please use the chat functions, I will ask you to do that a couple of times during the presentation itself. And absolutely welcome you spreading the word sort of through social media. So if you are a LinkedIn fan or a Twitter fan or a Facebook fan, if you do sort of post anything about this presentation or about the sort of thoughts more generally, then please do use the hashtag #HeadsUpForHeadTeachers. So aims of this presentation this morning. So a fairly broad, as Andy's already outlined, a fairly broad sort of outline. I did realise this morning that the radio came on to wake me up at 6 o'clock, and they were talking about the fact that it's Blue Monday. So slightly challenging on what is widely regarded as the darkest day of the year. But hopefully during this presentation, there'll be some inspiration, there will definitely be celebration, some indicators of support. We'll talk about networks, and more broadly, we'll talk about, you know, change that we might collectively call for, you know, through the NAHT, but through our own networks for change in the system. I might occasionally, depending on how the presentation goes, I might occasionally jump on my soapbox, and I would encourage you to do the same. So if you have got your soapbox with you and you want to jump on it in the chat, then please do. You will be more than welcome. So let's start off. Andy's asked the question, how are you? This is your first chat activity. So I want you to think of one word that describes how you are, and pop it into the chat. And if everybody does that, I think we'll have about 150 words in the chat at the moment. And the reason why I'm asking this is because I don't think we ask it enough. I don't think we ask it enough of our head teachers in particular. And I wrote a blog post about this a couple of months ago as a reflection on the pandemic, and it was also partly used in the promo for this. But we tend to ask the "how are you" question sort of briefly at the beginning or the entry to another meeting. And one of the things that I advocate is we should be making time and space in our professional sort of working week, and indeed in our personal working week, to actually focus on that question more deeply, especially at this time. And I did a presentation to the NGA before Christmas, and I've been doing one to groups of governors about how we can sort of make space and time for meetings where we ask of our head teachers as governors, how are you? And it's not the sort of lead into a meeting about something else. And the problem with that is when it's a lead in to something else, is you sort of get the, yeah, I'm okay, I think. And it'll be interesting to see what kind of words, when I look at the chat and reflect on the chat, it'll be interesting to see what kind of words that you put in there. But obviously, it's been an incredibly challenging 11 months. Headship is challenging anyway, but it's been incredibly challenging 11 months. And certainly this lockdown, in the conversations I'm having with people, this lockdown in particular seems to feel a bit different, and it seems to be making people feel a bit different. And that might be the time of year, it might be the fact that it's post-Christmas, it might be sort of general fatigue with the pandemic generally, but it may also be a sort of cumulative effect of the, you know, the drain on people's energy. So it'll be interesting to see what your responses are to that question, but hopefully you will also have the chance during this presentation to reflect on it a little bit more deeply in terms of how you are. And the next question, why are you here? And I don't necessarily mean why are you here in this presentation, although you might ask yourself that question later on, but why are you here? And over the course of the next few slides, I just ask you to reflect on that a little bit. And I mean, why are you in the job that you are in? Why do you do what you do? Because one of the ways in which we can address the well-being agenda sort of and take it beyond sort of sticking plaster solutions to well-being is we can reconnect with our purpose. And there'll be lots of opportunities during this presentation for you to reflect on that and to think about purpose and why we do the jobs that we do. So over the course of the next two slides, I'm going to talk about why I'm here and what brought me to the point at which I'm sat in this room in Cheltenham and I'm presenting to 151 of you as part of the NAHT. So a sort of little bit of a brief potted history. So as Andy says, formerly a head teacher of a secondary school that had some very specific challenges, and I was head teacher there for 4 years. but I was also an executive head of a primary school within a trust. So have been a head teacher across the phases in that regard. But if I'd sort of rewind a little bit before that, I'd sort of describe myself as an accidental teacher. So I finished university in 1996 after a sort of fairly, well, let's say it was a random route through my own personal education. But I found myself at the end of 1996 with my degree, which I was really proud of getting. I was first generation university student in my family. So really proud of my degree, but not really with any idea about what I wanted to do. And I ended up working at bizarrely, for somebody who had an applied biology degree, I ended up working at a car breakers yard in Gloucestershire. And if you have no idea what that means, it is exactly as it says on the tin. So we used to take cars and break them up and sell their parts. And after about a year of doing that, I sort of reflected that perhaps that wasn't the best use of an applied biology degree, and perhaps I should think about doing something else, although I did thoroughly enjoy that job. And I signed up for a teacher training course. I did a classic thing. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I signed up for a teacher training course. And I think it's safe to say that when I started that course, there were lots of, at that point, there were lots of college elements to it. And I remember thinking after about 2 months, why am I doing this? I really don't want to go back to school myself. I didn't really want to do it. But we did our first teaching segment in the October, at the end of October. It must have been the end of the first term, if I recall correctly. And we'd had 6 glorious weeks in which to prepare a 20-minute teaching segment. Can you imagine if you have the time to do that in education? So 6 weeks to prepare a 20-minute segment that I delivered to a group of Year 9 students. It was a piece of chemistry, if I recall, and there was a small group of Year 9 students, a 20-minute segment. And I remember as I was delivering this segment, I remember looking at the faces of the children who were all really focused on the job and on the task that I'd given them to do, and there was a little bit of a sort of practical demonstration for myself. And I remember looking around the room and sort of thinking, oh my God, I've really found my place. I've really found just the look of sort of intent concentration on their faces. And then actually, as we progressed through, as they started to understand what was happening, I just remember getting, and I still recall it to this day, it's sort of 23 years ago now, but I recall that sort of sense of, oh my God, I've taught people something. And for me, that was really, really important. It was the first time in my life at that stage, I was 26 years old. And it was the first time in my life that I'd actually sort of found something that I genuinely felt really passionate about. And I realized this, I realized that I'd been inspired during my education by various teachers and by various sort of university lecturers. And it is great to be inspired by other people. But in that moment, I realized that to inspire others is just the most incredible privilege that we can possibly have. And I'm saying all of that because I think it's quite important. I reflect on that moment quite a lot and have done over the course of the last 23 years. But I think it's important in terms of our nourishment and our well-being that we reconnect with those things that are at our core. And for me, that was very much at the core that, teaching, I found my place. I very quickly realized that, and I was fortunate to work for a head teacher who was inspirational himself. And I very quickly realized that I could have, more of an impact and I could inspire more people through leadership, or hoped I could, and went on a bit of a leadership journey. And very quickly sort of realized that actually the end of that journey for me was very much to become a head teacher. And I achieved assistant headship in the sort of mid-2000s. Then I got a deputy headship at another school in 2009. And sort of went on a fairly lengthy journey, but it was always with the aim of becoming a head teacher. And the reason why I wanted to become a head teacher is summed up best by this quote. And this is the quote that I put into my head teacher's card when I left that school for my deputy headship, because this is very much what he'd done for me. And this is how I summed up his leadership. And so this was, I'm saying this because this is my approach. This is my purpose. This was really what is at my core, is that I wanted to be somebody who was had a real vision for education and the school that I would be leading. I wanted it to be really learner focused. I wanted my learners to have real agency and control over their learning. And I wanted for my team within the school, I wanted to create a sense of autonomy and distributed leadership. And this quote for me just totally sums it up as one of my favorite leadership quotes, that we should, as leaders, people should feel that they've very much done it themselves when the task is done and the work is achieved. And that sort of brings us back to, why are you here? So that's why I'm here. I'll get into a little bit about why I'm specifically here and why I'm not still leading the school in a minute, but why are you here? And I think it's a really important question. I said earlier on, it's a really important question to define the answer to, because it's in our purpose that we find true nourishment and a sense of well-being. And it's very much the case that during a crisis and during this pandemic in particular, that we may have lost sight of that a little bit. The distraction of organising bubbles and wiping down desks and all of the sort of managing the guidance from the DFE in all of its various sort of chaotic forms. It's easy to lose that sense of, why we do what we do. And in losing the sense of why we do what we do, we can lose our purpose. And that in itself is not nourishing. In fact, it is the exact opposite. It can make us feel as if the job that we're doing is not the job that we set out to do. And indeed, one of the vision statement for Heads Up and the work that we do at Heads Up is that we want to enable leaders to be the leaders that they set out to be. And there is so much in our education system which sometimes stops leaders being the leader that they set out to be. And that was certainly very much my experience, being distracted by some of the external demands of your school and some of the operational work. And I think that is very much the case at the moment during the pandemic. So, I love this graph. It comes in two parts, this particular one, because I've erased some of it. So the journey of headship. So when I finally got my headship in 2014, I interviewed and achieved my headship at Marwood School in South Gloucestershire. How did I feel? Well, because I've been on that journey for some time, I was actually full of joy. It was a real sense of joy and purpose, and actually I'd achieved the thing that I'd set out to do. And I would ask you to reflect on how you felt. How did you feel when you achieved your headship? And again, it's important to reconnect to that feeling, because you became a head for a reason. Each and every one of you in this presentation, you became a leader for a reason. There was a purpose and a direction and an intent to what you were doing in becoming a head. And for me, I was full of joy. The other thing, because feelings always tend to come with an opposite, is after I'd had the phone call to say that I'd been offered the job and I'd accepted the job, and I put the phone down, I then had that moment of, oh my God, what have I done? What have I done? And it's interesting because that's sort of the beginning for many heads and many of the heads in the Heads Up network that we speak to. And many head teachers feel this. That was the beginning of the kind of imposter syndrome feeling, the self-doubt that all of us, I think, carry somewhere to different extents. And again, I think that has very much come to the fore during this last 11 months, that sense of imposter syndrome. And actually, can I do this? Am I able to lead my community through the sort of various challenges that the community is facing at the moment? And just in case you don't believe me, that is me back in 2014, full of joy, a cheesy sort of marketing photo to go to the local press about the new head teacher at Marwood School. And it's interesting because I look back at that photo and people often ask me in this presentation, I often get asked, would you do it again? So, knowing what you know now about the job that was in front of you, would you go back and do it again? Well, I'll answer that question in a minute. Let's come back to that one. This is the rest of the graph, the real journey. And that feeling of joy, that feeling of, come on then, let's do it. I'm a head teacher now. I've got this is the plan, this is the strategy, this is what we're going to do. And of course, it comes with bumps in the road. My experience and the 4 years that I had in school leadership were incredibly challenging. I will say right now, it wasn't a pandemic. So I have absolutely no idea what it is like to lead a school through a pandemic. So the thoughts that I will share on my own experience, it was a different crisis. And mine actually was a financial crisis, which hadn't been entirely apparent when I'd interviewed. But the school was really in serious financial trouble, and it was partly or mostly driven by a significant shift in sort of local area demographics, the number of children that were able to come to the school had been falling for some time and were continuing to fall. And my this is hard moment, as you can see on that graph, came in about September, about 4 weeks after I'd started, when I was preparing for a financial meeting with the governors. And at that point, I'd gone through the finances with a tooth comb and realised that we had to save, say, £500,000 during that school year, and then I had to save another £700,000 at the beginning of the next school year. So over the course of 12 months, I needed to save £1.2 million, which was about 25% of the budget. And suddenly being faced with not only the challenge of improving the education and the experience of the learners in the school and all of those things that I was really passionate about, and suddenly this massive amount of operational work, which would be very much focused on, where do we find those savings and how do we find those savings? And that really set the tone for the whole of my period as head teacher of that school. And we did it. We saved the money. It wasn't easy. Those processes never are. But we did that. We saved all of the money. We managed to do it without making any redundancies. But it was a real reshaping of the school. And as you can imagine, there was an awful lot of personnel work involved because we had to restructure lots of stuff. But there were also, as difficult as that was during that first 12 months, there were also lots of moments of yay and nice one and champagne as we started to see the things that we were putting in place in the school. And I use the we deliberately because it was the whole school focused on it, really starting to come to fruition, and especially for that next September. And we had really sort of 2 or 3 years like that were ups and downs. And the reality is what I learned was, well, that's leadership of a school. There are those up moments and there are those down moments. It is very much a roller coaster. And what I would say about the pandemic is that roller coaster has been very much, I suppose, has very much been amplified. The roller coaster journey has very much been amplified and condensed into quite a tight period of time. I was having a conversation with some head teachers last week who were saying it very much feels as if peaks and troughs all of the time. And it can literally feel like that from almost an hour-to-hour basis. I suppose my WTF moment, my what the fudge moment, during that period of time. So after 3 years of developing the school and very much feeling as if we were following that yellow arrow and the journey of that yellow arrow, at the end of the 3rd year of me being there, Ofsted arrived and put us in special measures. So in a period of time where we'd saved £2.6 million, restructured the school, really had a focus on learning, reconnected with the school community, where everybody felt we were self-evaluating as requiring improvements, but everybody felt, the local authority, the trust, the parent body, most importantly for me, the parent body and the staff body of the school and the student body of the school really felt as if we'd made a difference. Ofsted came in and projected a different opinion onto that. And for me, that was a sort of dagger to the heart, I suppose, would be the best way of describing it. And that's, let's talk about crisis. I had a real crisis of confidence, as you might expect at that point, where I'd had all of this evidence that things were getting better, but then this sort of external projection that said, no, it's not getting better. And that was a real shock to the system. I carried on for another year, and during that year we made the TV program that Andy is referring to. But that really affected me. It really impacted on me, and it really took away a lot of the joy, because one of the consequences of any of your contacts, but those of you who are leading in special measures schools, is one of the realities of leading through special measures is some of the things that you feel passionate about and some of the things that you have real purpose around in terms of your sense of education start to get taken away from you. You start to have to dance to somebody else's tune, and that tune is dictated by Ofsted. So a lot of the things that we put in place, which were very much about the longer term development and improvement of the school, basically started to get stripped away during that period of time. And I had real and significant issues in reconciling that with myself. And so during this presentation is titled "Where's Your Head At?" And I've told this story a number of times, so you may have heard it. But on the way to school in the February of that final year, Basement Jack's Where's Your Head At came on the radio as I was driving on my commute to school. And I had a real moment of self-reflection. Actually, where is my head at? And the reality of my reflection on that is that I was no longer enjoying and getting the joy from the role that I had done over the previous 3.5 years. And I'd always said to myself, I'd always promised myself, because the demand of being a head teacher is so high. You know, I've got a family of 4 children. You know what it's like. You spend long hours at school. You spend even hours out of school thinking a lot about the job and about leaving your community. And I'd always said that the point at which it stopped being joyful and I stopped enjoying it, that would be the time to reflect on. And over that final sort of period of 6 months, I made the decision to resign from my position as headship of that school, and I stepped away. That was brilliantly captured by the TV company who were filming their TV show, and that was aired in the November after I'd finished. But that was my crisis, and I suppose this presentation and the work that I do now as part of Heads Up is built around that experience, because my feeling is that it shouldn't be like that. We shouldn't have a system whereby leaders who feel really passionate and have a significant amount of skill, as you all do, and a significant amount of experience, as you all do, we shouldn't be taking that approach to them in our education system, where we sort of wait for them to break before we start to worry about doing something about it. But I'll pick up on that a little bit later on. So what did I learn? Well, I learned that I was disposable, and that's not really news, I suppose. You know, the reality is that, you know, we feel sort of professionally and personally very connected to the roles that we have as heads. You know, but you know, the reality is I left, and the deputy that I brought in took on the role, and that was actually part of my decision to leave, because I knew that I was leaving it in his more than capable hands. So I learned that I was disposable. I learned that I was broken, actually. And that's a really tough thing to reflect on, that the sort of series of adverse events that I had to unpick and solve and work on and work through had really taken its toll on me, both physically and also mentally. And that sort of thinking and the repair process of that, I'm still working through now. That's 2 years later, and I'm still working through that. And I really learned that I'd lost the connection to my purpose, that sense of purpose that I'd had when I set out on that journey to become a head teacher, and when I became a head teacher, I'd lost that connection. I'd really lost my way in many respects. And the reason why I set up Inspired Educate, as Andy has alluded to, is because I felt I couldn't be the only head teacher who felt like that, felt the disconnect between the sort of heart and values that I was leading my school community with, and the demand that the system had of me and my school community, which, you know, my feeling is that there's a bit of a disconnect between those two things. And I thought I can't be the only head teacher who feels like that. I still feel passionate about education, about the power of education to impact on young people. And actually, can I go and do something different by building a network of head teachers? And that network has become Heads Up. So it's run by Inspired Educate, but we call it Heads Up. And that's a network now of a couple of thousand head teachers who are in that network. And I suppose the biggest piece of learning is I learned that I was not the uber resilient superhero who was bulletproof in the way that I thought I was. I think I was a pretty resilient person, but actually what I learned was resilience has its limits. And I do get slightly annoyed. Resilience is one of those words which is sort of bandied around education as some form of badge of honour. And I really think that we should challenge that, because actually, you know, we shouldn't wait to find out what somebody's resilience limit is before we support them. And that tends to be, and that's certainly my experience, that tends to be the approach. Let's wait to see what the resilience limit is. Oh, we've broken that head teacher, right, let's find another one. My feeling is we can be better and much more intentional about that. So why was I broken? So this is sort of reflection. This graph is actually a graph about post-traumatic stress disorder, but I've renamed it post-traumatic growth. So you can see it's pretty easy to work out, but your ability to do your job, your level of functioning over time, and the impact that an adverse event can have. And headship, in reality, as Vic Goddard would say, best job in the world. And I still think that it is very much the best job in the world. And answering that question, would I go back and do it all again? Absolutely I would, because over that 4-year period of time, we had so much fun. Despite everything, we had so much fun, and it was such an enjoyable period of time. And we made a difference. Despite what Ofsted said, we made a difference for those young people in that community. And that work continues to this day. So 2 years later, without me being there, that work is still going on. So would I go back and do it all again? Yes, I would. What would I do differently? I would look after myself a heck of a lot better than I did. And I would be much more intentional about doing that. But what this graph is essentially showing is that, you know, headship can be a series of adverse events. Some of them are small, some of them are big. The pandemic is certainly an exceptionally unexpected, very, very large adverse event that you are all doing brilliant work, working your way through. And what we need to make sure is that after the adverse event, we bounce back to the thriving rather than resilience. We're thriving through it. And I think that one of the things that we need to now start really planning for is how do we come out of this period of time with the evidence that we've got that lots of head teachers are finding it difficult, unsurprisingly, of course it is. Finding it very difficult. How do we come out and make sure that we've supported those head teachers so they can bounce back to that thriving functionality rather than resilience, rather than survival with impairment, or indeed succumbing in the way that I did. And I think it's, you know, the sort of cumulative effect of adverse events is really important to take into account. You know, for me, that accumulation and then that end adverse event, the Ofsted inspection, you know, that was the one that I couldn't bounce back from. That's the one that made me succumb. And I knew that in my heart of hearts, I definitely wasn't bouncing back in the way that I perhaps wanted to, or indeed, and I didn't really even know how to go about doing it. However, there is good news. So this is a Japanese philosophy called Kintsukuroi, and it's to repair with gold. And I think this is really important. Because each of you, you know, through this period of time, each of you will, you know, you might not be broken, but you'll have your cracks, you'll have your, you know, things that will have happened to you during this pandemic that you found really difficult to deal with. And the positivity of that is actually, that's not a bad thing. And in the Japanese philosophy of Kintsukuroi, to take something that is broken, a broken pot, for example, and to repair it with gold, and to end up with something even better out of the other side of that, is really, really important. And one of the things that we do at Heads Up, and with the network of head teachers who are in Heads Up, and many of us have been through very, very challenging school experiences, is we recognise that actually we are better for those things that have happened to us. And you will be better as a consequence, you will be better leaders as a consequence of your experience of the last 11 months, because you will have learned so much about yourselves and about the people around you. And you will be a more beautiful version of yourself after this pandemic than you necessarily were before. And it's really important that we hold on to that, because we can feel low and we can feel low on energy, and we can feel mentally low, and from a well-being and nourishment point of view, we can feel low as a consequence of dealing with a series of adverse events. But I'm confident that you will recover and you will be better afterwards. But broadly, it's not okay. My feeling is it's not okay. It can be better if, rather than waiting for our head teachers and the leaders in our schools, the brilliant leaders in our schools, to be broken, actually, wouldn't it be better if we took a much more intentional approach to supporting ourselves, supporting each other and supporting other leaders? And actually, if we focused on the positive and the appreciative inquiry work that we can do in our education system. So that's what I'm going to sort of move into talking about now. So let's start with some sort of statements about that, if you like. So let's start with the statement. You know, the last 11 months have been exceptionally challenging, and you've had to do lots of work that you certainly didn't expect to have to do when you set out on your journey of school leadership. One of the issues across the system is that we can spend a lot of time as leaders focusing on those things that we need to develop and improve. And there is this negative rhetoric that exists around education. And what I would ask you to do is to reframe, to reflect on the last 11 months and to reframe it. Because actually what you've done is you've led your communities through the last 11 months, and you will have done it brilliantly. You would have been fantastic. You wouldn't know it from the media presentation, and you wouldn't know it from the nonsense that comes out of the DFE. but you will have done a fantastic job. There will be things that you will have wanted to do better. There will be things that you will reflect on and think, actually, I could have done that differently. There'll be things that sort of 20% of stuff that you could focus on and think, actually, I wish I'd done that. And we are predisposed and we are driven as leaders in the system, and indeed as the system more broadly, to focus on the things that are not working. What I'd like you to do is to reflect on the 11 months through the lens of, what did I do really, really well? Because actually, my view on education is that an awful lot of what we do is brilliant. If you think about education in its absolute granularity, in the specifics of what goes on, at the moment across this country, however many thousands of schools it is, many tens of thousands of schools, children will have arrived either in school or to virtual lessons this morning, and those children will be receiving an education, hundreds of thousands of them. And we should be celebrating that, because we've done a great job to enable that to happen within the context in which we're working. Head teachers across this land have done an absolutely brilliant job, supported by their leadership teams, supported by their teaching staff, supported by the support staff. We have made changes to education that even 12 months ago, if you rewind to last January, you would not have imagined in 1,000 years that you would have had to have done. But you've done them, and you've done them brilliantly. And we need to spend some time thinking about that and looking and changing the frame and the lens through which we look at the work that we do. And not just the work of the pandemic, but the work that we do on a daily basis. Because we spend so much of our time driven by the Ofsted agenda, driven by performance tables, driven by the DFE. We spend an awful lot of our time focused on the things that we want to develop and improve. And I'm not saying those things aren't important, but we should also carve out time to focus onto the 80 to 90% of what's going on in our schools, which is really, really good, which is a consequence of your great leadership. And I'm hamming it up a little bit, but one of the things that I really think we should do more is celebrate the work that head teachers and leaders do in our communities across this land. And it's very easy to knock it. It's very easy to succumb to the negative rhetoric. What I'm proposing is actually we celebrate it more and we change the narrative around that. So it's not okay, and I would like that to change, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. What are the key issues? What did I reflect on? So what did I learn? Number 3. Well, I learned that there are these key issues. Accountability, recruitment and retention was a real issue for me. Funding was a real issue for me. What is education? And what does society want from education? And I think, I'm not going to go into the detail of those, but I would leave those there as sort of, I'd leave them as the things that you are grappling with on a daily basis as school leaders. And I put accountability at the top on purpose, because and I'll come back to that a little bit later on, but we're in this bizarre situation in education in this country where the accountability system, which should be at the end of the process, it should be telling us how well we're doing it, has somehow found itself at the forefront of the process and is leading how we do it. And I think that my personal view on that, my soapbox view on that is wrong and shouldn't be the case. And those key issues, obviously at the moment, that's the norm of what you're grappling with, and there may be others that you would add. But that's the norm. That's what we're normally grappling with in normal times. And of course, we've got all of those, and then we've got a blooming great big pandemic stretched across the top of it. And the point I'm making here is nobody's taken that other stuff away. Accountability's kind of paused, but Ofsted have been trying to butt themselves back into the agenda for most of the last 7 months. And in some regards, I would argue in a sort of slightly ham-fisted way. So nobody's taken those other things away, but you've then got this additional layer of predominantly operational stuff that you are grappling with. And for me, those are the key issues that we really need to take a long, hard look at. As a profession, and as head teachers, as a subset of the profession, they are the things that I think we need to grab control of and make part of our purpose, beyond our school, necessarily within our schools, but also beyond our schools and the communities that we lead. So that's a potted history of my journey and what I learned from being a head teacher. But this is also a favourite quote of mine. I've learned that people will forget what you said and people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So this is Blue Monday, it's Blue Monday during a pandemic, and I've spent most of the last 30 minutes talking quite negatively about the profession. So it's time to switch that around a little bit. It's time to sort of change that, because I want to leave you feeling positive as you leave this meeting, as you leave this session. And what I find interesting about that is we are really in control of this. Individually, we are in control of this within our schools. And one of my biggest, I suppose, feelings of pride about Marwood School, despite all of the difficulty and the significant changes that we had to make. When I left that school, the staff were still very much with me. And you know, those staff gave, literally, you can imagine, they gave absolutely everything, you know, and they were people that they'd worked with were leaving all of the time because we had to reduce the staffing so much. But at the end of it, despite all of the things that we did and all of the things that I said, the feeling was one of positivity and of moving in the right direction. And I think that's really important that we remember that as leaders. I sincerely wish that our educational leadership at the DFE would also think about this a little bit more deeply when they do the things that they do. Because, you know, one of the problems, that negative rhetoric that I'm referring to that stems from the DFE and we see projected in the media, you know, one of the issues that we're facing is how people are being made to feel. You know, despite everything that everybody's given, education still continues to get a kicking. But let's shift the agenda a little bit. So I'm hopeful. I'm filled with hope, and that's partly about the person that I am. And I would encourage you all to do this. I've done this, but one of my greatest leadership strengths is hope. You can do a strengths analysis. There's an organisation called VIA, VIA, that you can look up on Google. VIA strengths analysis. My three top hopes are strengths are hope, creativity, and love. So I always approach things with hope, and I am really hopeful. And one of the reasons why I'm hopeful is I think we have some key opportunities being presented to us. So if we lift ourselves out of the sort of day-to-day, what we're dealing with the pandemic, if we bring ourselves out of that, there are some key opportunities for us individually, and there are some key opportunities for us as a system to lead significant change out of where we are at the moment. And for me, you'll see that those opportunities are just a reordering of what I put as key issues. So if we look at those things through a hopeful lens, we have an opportunity to really think and engage with ourselves and our communities about what is education. And we can see that conversation is starting to gather some real traction at a national level. Actually, what is education? What is education for? And what does society want from education? And I would encourage you as school leaders and as head teachers to make sure that you take the opportunities to engage in that conversation. Because part of the problem sometimes is that the real agents of change in our education system, the heads, often their voice is not heard in that conversation. And it's loads of think tanks and other people who sort of throw things into the mix. So I really encourage you to make sure that you're part of that conversation. I think once we've resolved the what is education for, and what does society want from education, we can then sort of think about the funding situation. And I think the opportunity will then come to solve the funding. So rather than doing it the other way around, I think we can really start to think about recruitment and retention. You know, what do we need in our schools, and what do we really, and we can start to appreciatively celebrate what we do in our education system, and that in itself will drive recruitment. And I think we should not only rethink accountability, but I think we should put it at the bottom of the list in the way that I have done here. It should be at the end of the journey. It shouldn't be at the beginning of it, and it certainly shouldn't be leading the way that we go about what we do. And if we take those opportunities, that gives us a chance to really reconnect with our purpose and our values, actually. And one of the reasons why I'm endlessly hopeful is it doesn't matter how many head teachers I have conversations with across the country, either one-to-ones as part of Heads Up, or through the work that I do with networks of head teachers in Heads Up, or indeed with networks of schools through whole education, is what I find time and time again is we may have different ways of doing it. So the what we do might be different in our schools, but the why we do it, there is nearly always a very, very strong connection. The values with which we lead our communities, there is always a strong connection. And I would ask you to really think about your own values, again, as a source of nourishment through this period of time, to reflect on your values and how they carry you forward. And if we take that exercise, we can do this. And this is another Japanese philosophy. It's called a Kaigai. And it's in a Kaigai that we can really find. So it's, in essence, this is your reason for being. So this really is, we're getting really sort of deeply into the sort of purpose space now, and thinking about our purpose and thinking about why we do what we do. But this is really quite a useful reflection tool. And if you really want to focus on your well-being and you really want to focus on your nourishment, I would encourage you to do this exercise. You can look this up on Google and you can reflect on it in your own time. But I would argue this on behalf of everybody in this room, and I may know some of you, there'll be lots of you that I don't know. But I would argue this, that in the same way that I worked my way towards that headship, and you may have worked your way towards your headship, or you may have ended up there accidentally. But if you look around this Venn diagram, you will find lots of these things resonate. So the first thing is, you're really good at it. Despite what we hear, and despite the sort of endless negative rhetoric, actually the school leaders in this country are the most skilled and the most experienced and the most trained and the most invested in that they have probably ever been. And you are really, really good at what you do. You might not always get the positive feedback that you want to get, and that's that's something else that we can look at in the system. Why do we not give head teachers more positive feedback? But I'm giving it to you here now. And so most of you will have led your schools brilliantly through the last 11 months. By God, what a challenging period of time. So the first thing is, you're really good at it. You wouldn't be doing it if you didn't love it. And there'll be all sorts of reasons to step out if you didn't love it. And I'm sure that you are doing what you absolutely love. I was doing what I absolutely loved. And it took me a while to find it. It took me 26 years to find the thing that I really loved, but I was doing what I really loved. So you're good at it and you love it. And by God, the world needs it. Our young people need us now more than ever. And it's in that connection between what we love and what the world needs that we really find our mission. We really find why we do what we do. And I'm absolutely certain that you would agree that our young people need us now more than ever. Our communities need us now more than ever as school leaders. So you're really good at it. You love it, and the world needs it. And the icing on the cake, somebody's going to pay you for it. So the world needs it. You can get paid for it. There's your vocation. You're good at it, and you can get paid for it. There's your profession. And if you've got all of those things, if you reflect on all of those things around that wheel, you will find you will reconnect with your sense of purpose. And the best thing you can do for your well-being right now is to do that. I can't take away, and neither can you, all of the operational things that you will have to do once you leave this presentation this morning and once you go back to the day job. But actually, what you can find solace in and what you can find comfort in and nourishment and a sense of well-being in is eventually we will come out of this period of time and you can get back to, and I would encourage you to make space in your busy diaries over the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, however long it takes us to come out of it, to think about the things that you're going to do post the pandemic. Because it's in taking that longer term view of the journey, the real journey, that we can iron out the ups and downs, and we can see that steady progress towards making improvements. So if you have the chance to reflect on that, I would sincerely hope that you can and that you do. And what can we do collectively? Well, we can change the narrative. And I think now is the perfect opportunity for us to do that. So because we can talk about it endlessly, but actually we need to collect together. We need to connect and collectively, and we need to co-construct a new narrative for education, and one that stems from this notion that actually 80 to 90% of what we do on a daily basis is absolutely blooming brilliant. So why are we not talking more about it? Our communities are. I'm sure you are leading communities where you've had more connection and feedback from your communities, and our communities are appreciating our schools in a way that they didn't necessarily do before the pandemic. And I think we need to take that energy and we need to take that approach, and we really need to start to change the narrative around the great work that we do in education. I think we have to be much more intentional about supporting head teachers in our system, and that's really the sort of purpose of Heads Up. Working with the NAHT and working with various other bodies, can we be much more intentional? Let's not leave it until the next adverse event happens and somebody can't recover. And let's start to put things in place where we can properly support head teachers across the whole sort of length of their journey in leadership. And most importantly, and this is a real sort of plea, but also a bit of a challenge for everybody in the room, we have to be much more intentional about supporting ourselves. Part of the problem with supporting head teachers and putting support in place in head teachers is because of the types of people that we are, because of that sense of purpose, and because of what we do, that sense of ikigai, we will look after everybody around us first before we look after ourselves. And Patrick Otley O'Connor, who many of you may know from Twitter or may know personally, me and him have talked a lot over the last 18 months around this notion of put your own oxygen mask on first. It is really, really important. And we can't be unintentional about that. You can't sort of sit there and wait for it to accidentally happen. We have to really grasp that agenda and go, right, what am I doing to really, really sort of support myself, do the things that I know are going to make me better and give me that sense of well-being and nourishment. And the last thing that we can do is we can spend a lot more time doing this. And I think this is really, really important. You know, head teachers not only are the last perhaps to get looked after and to look after themselves, but they're also often the last to get thanked. So you can take a massive thanks from me for what it's worth. You can throw it in the bin if you want, but I would like to thank you all for the great job that you do. And I spend a lot of my working week now, you know, with head teachers and really making sure that I spend time thanking them for the job that they're doing. And our communities, I think, should, and actually are, I think there's evidence our communities are thanking schools and head teachers much more. But I think we need to spend much more time appreciating and being grateful for the great leadership that we've got in our system. How are you in more depth? I would ask you these questions, which I'll just allow you to scan whilst I'm talking. I'm not going to go through them. But this is how you can start to think much more intentionally about the support that you give to yourself. And if you want to explore that in more depth, you can join me on the morning of the 28th of January, which is the follow-up session to this one. And we're going to look in more depth at how we can take practical steps over a couple of hours, where we can be much more intentional and practical about how we look after ourselves and each other. So if that's something that is of interest, I would encourage you to come and join me on that session on the 28th. And what can you do right now? What can we do right now? Well, I would encourage you to come and join the Heads Up Network. We offer, and our offer is free, but we offer one-to-one coaching support. We call it crisis coaching. But if you just need somebody to chat to, if you just want somebody to rant at down the phone, if you just want to pick up the phone and scream at me for an hour, please do. But we offer one-to-one coaching support because we recognise the need for it, not just during the pandemic, more broadly. We offer twice weekly program of Heads Up peer support sessions, which are always really positive, but we talk about the issues that head teachers are facing, and they are safe, supportive, positive and reflective spaces for you as a head teacher, where you can be your authentic self. You can take the invincibility cloak off. You can drop the sort of game face for a while, and you can be authentically you. We're also starting to do Heads Up local authority projects, and I would encourage you within your local authority, please do encourage your local authority to get in touch with us. We've just launched one with Oxfordshire County Council, and we've got about 13 other local authorities who are interested and we're in conversation with about putting bespoke, intentional and sustainable support in place in local authority areas. And I would propose, depending on what happens off the back of this presentation, but we also perhaps look at a Heads Up NAHT project along the same lines. So that's what we can do right now. There's a little bit of feedback from the people who join Heads Up and work with us, the head teachers who are in the community, and you can read that whilst I finish up. Thank you for listening. I hope that's been valuable and useful. Sorry, it's been a bit rambly. It is a Monday morning. And I'm supercharged on very strong coffee, but hopefully an opportunity for you just to reflect a little bit about what it means to lead through a crisis and why it is so important that you look after yourselves for the future of our education system. And at that point I will stop, and I will stop my screen share, and Andy, I will hand back over to you.
Thanks, Joe. No, I was just going to pick up. Thank you so much for that fantastic presentation. Some really positive comments coming through in the chat bother. I know it's hard to present and look at the chat at the same time, so I was sort of taking notes of what people responded when you said, "How are you?" I thought it was really quite interesting the way that flowed through. So when you first said it, the most common thing was tired. So unsurprisingly, it's Monday morning, isn't it? Yes. Apart from anything, and not a normal Monday morning by any chance. Exhausted, stressed. And then we got frustrated and fed up, which is sort of the next reaction you'd get after that. You know, so that's the cumulative of that. Then overwhelmed, and then it changed. And then we got proud, passionate, and privileged. And those three go together nicely, all beginning with P. And blessed. And then people started talking about being able to make a difference. So once you get past the I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I'm stressed, I'm fed up, I can't take it anymore, there's a real energy there that's sort of underneath the surface of that, that's just waiting to be tapped into, and it's still there, and the head teacher's got that in reserve, and that's just a fantastic thing to see that coming through. People saying they're passionate and proud and blessed.
Yeah, I know, Andy. I think that's a really fantastic. It was great to see that in the chat, and that's a really fantastic reflection. And I think there's something really important in that, because the feelings that are our main ones are at the forefront of our minds. I mean, none of the things that you've said are massively surprising. We hear the same thing in heads up sessions every week. People are frustrated, they are exhausted, they're angry, angry about, all of those things are true. But actually the point about the purpose bit is actually the burning fire that sits in most of our bellies about why we do the job that we do. That brings the energy. And if we can reconnect to that, that is the thing that will see us through that tiredness and that frustration. And actually, if we can do that collectively, we can do that individually for ourselves, but we can then also do it collectively as a system. My God, that's powerful. If we can seize the agenda back, and let's face it, seize the agenda back of our profession. It's ours. It's not the DFE's. The fact that they're called the Department for Education, I find deeply ironic. I think the one thing they could do is rebrand themselves as the Department Against Education, because it feels like that. But actually, do you know what? Let's put them to one side. And as a group of head teachers, let's reconnect to that heart and that burning passion in the belly. And that will see us through. Those are the things where we find our thriving. So that's really interesting. I'll take a good look at those chat comments later on when we finish.
Yeah, and that certainly flowed through from the comments. So people saying, how do we move forward together? Where's the strategic leadership? Which then took us on to it's not the Department for Education. It's not at Ofsted. Well, it's not in the government either. And then I think when people reflect on that, I thought, actually, it's within us all, isn't it, really? It's us. It's within school leaders' grasp to take that strategic leadership. So great that heads up's there. Great that there's an avenue for people to get support and network and free. And if nothing else, do some primal screaming at you. So we've had Blue Monday and Primal Scream. So it's an 80s indie pop revival going on here, which is great. So thank you everyone for joining us there. I think we had around 150 on the call, which is great. I'll just do a little bit of wrap up if I may. There's a second chance to see this, or a second sitting, in fact, because it will be live and direct at half 5 this afternoon. James will be on again, and Nick Brook will be joining us as well. So that'll be great. So if you missed the start, or if you've got colleagues you want to think will benefit from this, it's free to join up. Details on the NHT website at 5:30 today. And as James has said, the 12-inch remix, sorry, I'm still on that 80s vibe. The 12-inch remix heads up course, which will be a half-day session, is on the morning of Thursday, the 28th of January. So if you'd like to join us for that, we've got a few other things coming up. Tomorrow we've got an update on what's happening with Ofsted with Philippa on ahead, which is a free webinar, and there's a course on that the following week. And we've got a course on early learning goals with Ruth Swells, which is I'm sure of a lot of interest as you work in early settings. So a lot happening on the HT website. Find out more there, more about the Pathway programme, which of course is up and running now. Details about NHT membership, and we've got a rather nice offer on at the moment. And I think also importantly, if you look on our website, there's details of the Wellness and Protect programme. So there's real support we're offering there to people at the moment. That's probably all we've got time for this morning. If you've enjoyed it, do tell your colleagues to come and join us at 5:30 for the second session. If you didn't, don't tell them, but I hope you did. I found it really empowering. And James, I'll give the floor back to you for a final word to everyone, if I may.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. And well, just thanks to everybody for joining. I hope it's been useful in a positive way. And I would finish off by saying, and sort of reinforcing what I've said all the way through, I think you're all brilliant. And I don't know you, yes, but I know that you will be doing the absolute best that you can in incredibly challenging circumstances. So I'd take my hat off. If I was wearing one, I'd take my hat off to you. And I mean that sincerely and authentically. And I look forward to the opportunity to work with you more closely. If you sort of connect with Heads Up, then you'll be more than welcome.
Great. Okay, wonderful. Thank you everyone for joining us, taking the time out an hour out of your very busy lives. I'll stop talking and let you get back to your busy lives. But I hope you feel, if nothing else, slightly empowered and encouraged by everything James has said today. So thank you from me and thank you from James. And that's all, folks. Thanks. Bye.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone.